and then we've got one more things.
I'm sticking with Alan Kohler. My exposure to pop culture is the deeply serious like this or trash TV, which I'm too ashamed to talk about.
You've got to represent, Frankie, for all those listeners that also are harbouring trash TV addictions.
Yes. I don't mind admitting that, but I'm not going to talk specifics.
Frankie, I may supplement my one more thing with a trash TV mention if that will coax you out of your trash shell.
We'll see.
We could start a new segment entitled Trash or Treasure.
Trash or Treasure. Because we don't have enough segments or corners on this podcast.
You can never have too many corners.
I think this podcast has become some kind of higher dimensional hypercube. That's how many corners it contains.
Well, if you have too many corners, don't you just end up with a circle and you'll just go in circles?
Ooh.
You do.
Well, I don't know. That's like just in, two-dimensional platonic geometry. I don't know about this whole higher dimensional thing.
To tell the truth, neither do I.
This is Let Me Sum Up, your irregular deep dive into recent films about climate and energy. I'm Luke Menzel, recording today on Wurundjeri Land, and for this bumper holiday special, I'm joined by, three co-hosts, Global Vice President for Mistletoe and Eggnog at the Let Me Sum Up podcast, Frankie Muscovich. Hello, Frankie.
Good morning, everyone. It's great to be here on Gadigal country. I am still feeling the after effects of the Christmas period, having ingested, I don't know, probably a year's worth of calories in the last week from my Italian family feast, where they cook for, there's 15 people there and about, enough food for 50. So we're still living on leftovers very happily.
Well, if you were at Christmas lunch and you were bailed up by your annoying uncle who started questioning the science of climate change, the woman you'd want on hand is Alison Reeve. G'day, Alison.
Hello, Luke. It's really nice to be back. I am here on Ngunnawal country. It's a beautiful morning here. And like Frankie, just sort of gradually working my way through the 3 kilos of sugar that we turned into cakes and biscuits for a morning tea for 5 people.
And our third co-host is a man who considered putting an elf on his shelf, but put the dog from the This Is Fine meme there instead. Tennant Reid. G'day, Tennant.
It's great to be here. There are remarkably few people over the last 3 years who have recognised the This Is Fine dog in my Zoom backdrop. But yes, always there. Maybe I need to print out a bigger, more prominent set of flames to prop behind him.
All right. Well, for this, our second annual holiday spectacular, we are skipping the report and discussing climate-themed action thriller How to Blow Up a Pipeline. But first, at the conclusion of 2022, we held our first ever Wonky Awards, our gong for the best climate and energy paper of the year. The process is simple. We each nominate a paper we covered on the podcast, make our case for why it was the year's best, and decide our winner live on the show. No chummy, smoke-filled rooms for this podcast. We let it all hang out. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, are we all clear on the rules?
Are there rules?
There are no rules. I'm fighting to the death.
Wow.
Sorry, I've got a report. I'm going to back it. Alison, you'd be in your interests to support this.
Well, yes. I mean, we should acknowledge that Alison's presence on the Wonkies gives rise to a scenario not foreseen by the founders of this august award, because our firm rule on not covering our own papers should mean we are never in the position of sitting in judgment on our own work. However, Alison joined us as a guest host shortly after Grad's Get Off Gas report, so I'm waiting with bated breath to see if that comes up in the course of our conversation.
Well, look, I resent the implication that the founders of this august podcast could have failed to foresee anything, and the inherent, divinely inspired nature of their cultural patrimony must never be questioned.
That explains why I don't have my T-shirt yet.
There's so many reasons why you don't have your T-shirt yet, Alison. Moving right along.
We could start a segment where Alison and Frankie talk about why Alison doesn't have her T-shirt yet, and Ten and I could just go have another glass of eggnog.
I actually think that would be a great podcast. Spin-off number one.
This would be the spin-off series.
Where in the world are this podcast's T-shirts?
That's right.
Yeah, there you go. All right. Well, Alison, we might start with you. What are you putting forward for our consideration?
Well, I decided that, to be fair, I should not nominate a paper that I hadn't actually read. I also have to confess I did not listen to all episodes of the podcast last year.
Shocking.
Shame.
Well, no, I look, there were a couple of episodes where I'm like, that's going to be like complicated and difficult, and I'm going to have to concentrate to listen to it. Like, I can't do it while I clean the bathroom or something. So
hang on, which episodes of this podcast can you clean the bathroom?
Most of them, apparently.
Surprisingly many.
My God.
So I am nominating the paper from episode 33, which was Reduce, Remove and Store, which is the Climate Change Authority's report into carbon dioxide removals. I chose this paper mostly because it really made me think when I read it, but I also thought it sort of was definitely doing everyone a service by raising a policy issue that maybe people haven't really put a lot of thought into yet, unpicking some of the whiskers on that issue that you need to think about. They had some quite practical near-term things that governments could pick up. So that was my choice. And I think basically if you don't vote for this one, then frankly, you're someone who just thinks that there's no such thing as removals. You're going for absolute zero. And I wish you the very best of luck for that.
Well, coming in strong very early in the nomination process. So my comment on this is I thought this was a really good paper as well. This was in my top 3 or 4, and I thought it paired incredibly well. If one was to delve back into the back catalogue, I doubt there's many listeners listening that haven't listened to every episode of the podcast this year, other than Alison.
Whether or not cleaning their bathroom.
But if one was to revisit some of the gems of 2023, one could very easily pair this with episode 24. So start with episode 24, which was like a global survey of the state of carbon dioxide removal, which was really, really good. And I think sort of set the table. And then the Climate Change Authority zoomed in shortly afterwards with kind of reflecting on what that all means for Australia. So those 2 episodes together, if one was to try and get your head around all of that, I think would be a pretty good primer.
Yeah, I really like this paper too. And the thing that I will salute the most, again, about this paper is I really like it when people show signs of evolving their thinking. I get a bit suspicious when somebody like executes a complete 180-degree turn on their entire worldview. But when people have like looked at the evidence and adjusted their views in light of the evidence and thought through the implications of that, like I respect that. And this paper does evidence that in terms of making, recognising a lot more of the complexity that lurks behind the usual statement of a ton is a ton, distinguishing one kind of abatement or emission from another and extending that thinking to the nature of carbon dioxide removals. So, well done, intellectually flexible people, say I.
You must remember, hun, a ton is not a ton.
I was waiting for it.
On that you can rely.
Play it again, Luke.
Yes. I didn't read this paper because I was dealing with a newish tiny human, but I had read the previous paper that was episode 18, which is a broader, more, I think, sort of global outlook. So one, I think, is really good to have some more locally based thinking about removals because I think, as we've all said, we're not going to get there without considering this stuff. And as we keep reflecting back to the impact of things like the learning rates paper and the fact that if we don't start leaning in even more heavily on deployment of technologies that we've got, that more of the task is going to be left to nascent technologies that haven't come down in cost. What are the implications of that? So I really like that papers like this tend to highlight the near and present challenges even more as well, and raising awareness of, you know, the fact that we need to start getting onto these issues and not ignoring them.
I really liked how you just subtly gave a shout out to 2022 wonky award-winning paper, Empirically Grounded Technology Forecasts and the Energy Transition, Frankie.
We reference it in pretty much every episode of this podcast, so I couldn't leave the Holiday Spectacular on the table without giving a shout-out to them, the recipients of the first inaugural Wonky Award.
All right. I think we've given that a good thrashing. Tennant, what are you putting forward for our consideration?
I am going to suggest Discounting the Distant Future by Jeffrey M. Heal, Noah Kaufman and Anthony Milner. This is a paper that looks at the question of how we should value costs and benefits that accrue well into the future, which is a relevant issue for a lot of topics, but especially for climate change. And the paper, it's short, like there's only really 10 substantive pages to it, but it is jam-packed with ideas and counter-ideas and syntheses, and really highlights that while the familiar approach of just pulling discount rates out of the market and applying those, if a discount rate's good enough for an investment in a car factory, it's good enough for an investment in your great-great-grandchildren's future. While that has obvious problems, including with any substantial number, making your grandchildren and your great-grandchildren worth almost nothing. The alternatives of using an ethically coherent approach, ethical coherence tends to produce disagreement about whose ethics are more coherent, and deep weirdness. If you try and apply it too rigorously, maybe you shouldn't be consuming anything at all. Maybe you should be doing nothing but invest for the future. So it was a great paper. It was mind-expanding, and the topic underlies just about everything we do in climate and indeed energy. If you found that paper under your Christmas tree in a stocking, you'd be pretty happy with it, I suggest.
I think anyone who works in climate policy should read this paper. I think it's hard to overstate the influence or the impact of the numbers that are used when it comes to things like discount rates or social cost of carbon. They underpin pretty much every policy that you see. And oftentimes, in my experience, there's not been a lot of questioning, I think, over the last 10 years or so over why we use certain discount rates and things like that. And I thought this was, as you say, Tennant, really thought-provoking along those lines, and gave some really interesting context around what the EPA in the US, is doing in having revisited the figures that they use. So they're enormously influential, and I think anyone who's working in this space should endeavour to understand better where those numbers come from, why we use them, start to evolve the broader understanding and possibly refine the way we use them, because I don't think there's any getting rid of it.
Yeah.
And relatively small changes, or what appear to be relatively small changes in discount rates, can make a really big difference to the outcome. And the my abiding memory of the paper and the reading that I did around that paper was talking about the rate of pure time preference. One plugs into your spreadsheet, and if you put in 3%, that means someone born in 1995 counts for twice as much as someone born in 2020. So we're not even talking about, human beings that we're born some hundreds of years hence. We're talking about people that are living together in the same time period, and the relative value that these numbers puts on lives for people born very closely together and, adjacent generations is really remarkable, right?
It's an absurd result, and everybody knows that 1979 is the year of peak human value.
This is one of the ones where I haven't listened to the episode or read the paper. So I will sit this one out, but you have made it sound very interesting. And Frankie says that if I work in this area, I should have read it. So I'm feeling ashamed.
Take a good hard look at yourself, Alison.
At minimum, you should listen to the episode.
Yeah.
I think is what we should. Is what we
Tis
should
the
say.
season for self-loathing, after all.
Look, I don't have any New Year's Eve plans at the moment, so maybe I'll listen to it then. Start the year as I mean to go on.
All right, Frankie, what have you got?
Okay, guys, I don't think we need to consider any more papers because I have the clear winner. I am making a hard pitch for the Grattan Institute's paper, Getting Off Gas, Why, How and Who Should Pay. This report was done by Tony Wood, our very own fabulous guest host of LMSU, Alison Reeve and Esther Suckling. And I think it's a timely, concise, compelling report that deals with, I think, one of the really thorny issues about a chunk of emissions associated with natural gas, which we know we need to get off if we're going to meet our net zero by 2050 commitments. So the premise of the paper is that, natural gas is 22% of Australia's emissions. We need to get off gas if we're going to meet our net zero target. And whilst a lot of the focus to date has been on, industrial uses of gas, energy generation, there are other policies now dealing with some of that. But across the country, there are 5 million households that use this stuff for cooking, for heating, and for hot water. And that transition is not going to happen overnight. It's complex. So we need to get started now. I think, the only other things I would say was it had a lot of really good ideas about the sorts of policy interventions that need to happen here. It sets out the problem really clearly. It observes that this has been a policy-free area to date by and large. And so papers like this can give the courage required to governments to move when they know they need to. And it has some very good suggestions around that, around sending clear dates, like a direction of travel, and hence the suggestion for banning new gas connections so as to not make the problem worse. And I think importantly, whilst there are calls to action on policies that, should be looked at now, it also raises questions that aren't resolved. And the big one at the end of the paper is really, how do we pay for the decommissioning of the national gas grid? That's a really tough issue and needs to be debated, in public and lots of sort of ideas brought to the fore about that. So my hat goes off to you, Alison, and co-authors. I thought it was a brilliant report and very worthy of the second annual Wonky Award.
It's a strong case.
Yep.
What do you reckon, Alison?
I'm in a terrible compromised position here because of the podcast's no self-dealing rule. Obviously, I think it's a good report. I've done, I think, 8 Grattan reports now, and of all of them, that has been my favourite one. And the one that I felt was like the most complete, even though, like you said, Frankie, we didn't answer the very important question about how you pay for it. So if we come to a vote, I will see this one out, to be fair. But I mean, I think one of the things that makes a report or a paper good is often not just about the content, but about the timing and when it hits the public consciousness. And I think on this one, we did kind of nail the timing pretty well. We got it out there right at the time when people were starting to talk about this, when there was a hunger for solutions, when, like you said, there was a hunger for, I guess you'd say, political cover for some governments. Still waiting for my thank you card from the Victorian government for taking the shock jock bullet for them. I'm sure it's in the mail.
They might have felt that the shock jocks had a little more ammunition still left over afterwards.
I think that's the case, actually. I think we sort of took the first salvo and they've now reloaded and pumping away. Yeah. But look, also, thank you for the kind words, and thank you for covering it on the podcast in the first place. Like, I remember listening to that episode and I thought all of your criticisms were fair, and I did come away from it sort of thinking, yeah, maybe we did all right, but it had some holes in it. So
there weren't many criticisms on the podcast.
Yeah, I feel like this was kind of Grattan at its best, in that it both sort of moved forward the kind of the understanding by doing some really, I think, helpful analysis of where we were in the transition away from gas, what the implications of that related to net zero targets and interim targets that have been committed to in various jurisdictions, kind of the implications of putting together what can be siloed conversations between, aspirational targets on the one hand and practical near-term policy on the other, but also kind of collating a lot of insights and understanding that were pretty well canvassed in the community of energy and climate wonks, but hadn't necessarily had a full airing in the public debate. And I think, as you say, Alison, the timing of this was excellent. It kind of landed at the perfect moment to kind of crystallise a conversation that I suspect we're going to be having for a number of years hence, but it got the ball rolling in a really effective way. And it is a great report. And it was in my top two for the year, and I can understand Frankie's strong advocacy for it. It is absolutely in the mix.
The thing that I like the best about the Grattan paper is the thinking on show about the relationship between financial incentives and regulation, or between sticks and carrots, because we haven't had quite a complete vacuum in degasification policy, but it's been for the most part, very, very centred around financial incentives that clearly can't do the whole job of transition. But regulation raises all kinds of curly questions, which we'll maybe next year be able to grapple with through the regulation impact statement process that the Victorian government's now going to do on a bunch of things related to electrification. But, regulation is tricky. Money is expensive. And a creative and sensible fusion of those things, a handoff from giveaways to phase outs, is a really clever piece of policy thinking that is conveyed by this report. So I think that's going to be a bit of a touchstone over the next few years of working our way collectively through how we make this very logistically complex, massive transition happen.
I'm looking forward to the sequel, Alison, on how to phase gas networks down.
We do have that on the list. But we have a couple of other things to do first.
Ooh, you heard it here first, guys.
There you go. Get your popcorn for that one. Okay, I'm going to make the case for a paper by Dr. Ron Ben-David, which is called Rethinking Markets, Regulation and Governance for the Energy Transition, which we covered back on episode 32. This is a no-holds-barred critique of energy market institutions and design. And Ben-David argues that this design, which we should note he himself had a hand in, was fit for purpose when the name of the game was eking out efficiencies from an energy system that had more or less hit a steady state, with well understood energy technologies and operational parameters. However, he is highly sceptical that it can successfully manage a system in flux, in which we're integrating multiple novel technologies. We're grappling with an ever-expanding list of coordination problems across supply and demand. Really, we're sort of building the track in front of us, and it's not entirely clear exactly where we're going to land in terms of the mix of technologies and how the whole system's going to function. I think this paper is strongest on problem definition. It doesn't furnish the reader with too many definitive solutions. If anything, it provides sort of a compass bearing on the direction we should be heading in. And if you haven't listened to that episode, the TLDR is state governments, you're up. It's kind of handball to them to kind of see us through the next decade or so. But I do think it's incredibly powerful as a provocation, and it's encouraging us all to think outside the box that we all constructed for ourselves back in the late 1990s and early 2000s, and consider whether there might be another way of doing things, which for mine makes it a pretty valuable contribution to the debate and worthy of a wonky. What do you all reckon?
It's certainly fizzing with ideas, and from malevolent AI in the appendix to the whole notion of RBD as Dr. Frankenstein rejecting his own creation, which maybe leads to the NEM lurching out of the darkness and destroying all that RBD holds dear at some point. It was a very thought-provoking paper. I'm glad I read it.
This was actually my number 2 choice. Oh, yeah, it was very close between this and the CCA one. And I mean, I think just coming back to what Tennant was saying before about intellectual flexibility, I think that's one of the strengths of this paper, is that, you know, Ron Ben David was kind of the granddaddy of the NEM and the very, very market-based regulatory approach, and he's now saying, my idea didn't quite work out the way that I thought it did. It's not working for what we've got now. We need to do a rethink. I think also it's another one where the timing was really important. It's come along at a time when everyone is starting to go, how do we fix the NEM? You know, is it working for people? What's not working? And I think it was very useful to have someone sort of lay out a very first principles approach to it. I think he was a little bit short on the how process, I think, and I think he still had a touching amount of faith in process, which potentially has not been working as well either. But yeah, I mean, I thought it was a great paper. The whole series is good, actually. It comes along at a really good time. And it does force you to do that first principles thinking rather than just go, you know, how do we tweak and add on a few more little bits to this kind of Heath Robertson-esque thing that we have now. Also give him extra points for the W.B. Yeats.
Yes.
We need more literature in climate and energy papers, I say.
Did you have any classic literature references in Getting Off Gas, Alison?
We did not.
Physician, heal thyself.
No, we did not. I think the best one I've ever managed in anything was an op-ed I wrote when the NEM was falling apart last year, and I managed to sneak in Tolstoy's all dysfunctional markets are dysfunctional in different ways. No, I didn't. I was going to do that. The one I did sneak in was a Hemingway. How did you go bankrupt slowly and then very quickly?
Yeah.
All right. Well, we have 4 papers in the mix. We've got the Rethinking Markets one from Dr. Ben David we've just discussed. We've got your Getting Off Gas report, Alison. We have Discounting the Distant Future, which is the discount rates paper from the Columbia University Centre on Global Energy Policy. And we have the CCA's Reduce, Remove and Store, the role of carbon sequestration in accelerating Australia's decarbonisation. Now we get to the bit we have to decide. Are there any that we feel like we can knock out of the gate?
I was just going to go ahead and unilaterally call it for Grattan and see if anyone objected. But, you know, I'm here for that approach also.
Going for the throat.
Yeah,
well, look, Grattan and Ben David were absolutely kind of neck and neck for me, so I'm very comfortable with Grattan. But if there's a rearguard action for Ben David, then my vote is winning at this point.
I see merits to all of the papers this year.
We love all our children.
You're all winners. And on the basis, though, of real-world impact, which is not the only basis to judge things by, I think for some of these, their biggest impact lies in the future. I think the carbon dioxide removal one, for instance, is really laying some groundwork for some very important policy thinking that is needed and substantive policy that's needed over the next few decades. But I do think that so far of the four, the Grattan paper has had the biggest impact both on policy substance and on the discourse around the topic. It has been impactful.
All right.
Calling it.
There you go, Alison.
Yes.
It is my great pleasure to announce the winner of the 2023 Wonky Award for Best Climate and Energy Report. It is Getting Off Gas, Why, How and Who Should Pay by Tony Wood, Alison Reeve and Esther Suckling from the Grattan Institute. This is where I insert a swell of awards music.
And this
Alison,
is where I hug people
clap
and
you onto
cry,
the stage.
Thank God in my age.
Yeah.
And that sort of stuff.
Yeah, you need to
And
give
then
us
the
a little
music
speech.
swells again to force you off.
Because this quote-unquote opening segment has now been running for half an hour.
It's content rich.
Content rich.
Well done, Alison. That's a great
Is
result.
there a suitably fantastic meme coming Alison, Tony and Esther's way?
I'm sure there is.
Yes. But when you send my T-shirt, you can send the framed certificate along with it.
All right. Well, we'll call the other three reports runners up. Really, really impressive work from all three, and indeed, another bumper year of reports. And we'll give our usual shout out to all the folk toiling out there, doing research, collating thoughts, doing original thinking, and moving the state of argumentation and debate forward in this critical space. It's incredibly important work, and this podcast is really all about all of you and highlighting some of it that would otherwise not see the light of day. So well done, everybody.
God bless us, everyone.
All right. Shall we chat about a movie?
Yeah.
We should.
Yes.
2023 saw the theatrical release of How to Blow Up a Pipeline, a climate movie that has been both controversial and critically acclaimed. It is an action thriller about a group of 20-something Americans that form the view that peaceful protest is not up to the challenge of driving the kind of systemic transformation we need to address climate change. This well-constructed, suspenseful film follows their attempt to sabotage an oil pipeline in Texas, while a series of flashbacks explore the motivations of the various characters for pursuing this course of action. This movie is an adaptation, not from a novel, but from a 2021 manifesto from academic Andreas Melm, which calls for climate activism to get over its traditional adherence to non-violence and embrace active sabotage of fossil fuel infrastructure. Now, at this point, I need to warn you that there are spoilers ahead, so if you don't want to be spoiled on this movie, I suggest you pause the podcast. It is available to rent on most streaming services, and if you're in Australia, I understand it is streaming for free on Stan. With that important caveat out of the way, Tennant, what did you make of this movie?
So this movie's existence is deeply strange. Like, if there's not a lot of political tracts that get turned into dramatic movies, and I can't actually think of any right now, but if there are, I'm sure they're not as sort of nail-bitingly tense and exciting as this one is. So I think we need to discuss it a bit as movie and a bit as an exploration of the ideas, and then maybe talk a bit about the ideas of the original book, because the movie, I felt, played quite a straight bat in having characters who have themselves ideas, often conflicting ideas, and not really tipping its hand on what it thinks you are supposed to think about it all. It is depicting people who are in the midst of a political movement, but this is also like it's a caper movie. It's a heist movie. It's Ocean's 11, but instead of a group of kooky super criminals, these are a rainbow coalition of diverse young activists and people with different reasons for being keen on striking a physical blow against fossil fuel infrastructure. And the big score is partly, will they succeed in blowing it up? And it's partly, will they get away with it? But it's even more so, what will their action mean when they have accomplished it? Because, spoiler, they do accomplish it. A movie called How to Blow Up a Pipeline, in which a pipeline is not in fact blown up, probably would be a bit anticlimactic. And there is a decent pair of explosions in this movie. So I thought, like, as a movie, I got my money's worth. My popcorn was consumed. It was like Hitchcock talked about the difference between surprise and suspense. And surprise is, like, loosely paraphrasing, surprise is when you have a scene at a dinner table and a bomb goes off suddenly and the audience is surprised. But suspense is a scene where you know there is a bomb under the table and you, the audience, know more than the characters do. You know that it may go off at any moment, but you don't know when, and you are kept in this state of extreme tension. And this movie, I thought, did a terrific job of having elements of, it's very well explained to you what is going on in some respects around the plan for the caper. And you know just how badly wrong things can go when you've got people making half-assed homemade explosives out of sort of stuff you could get from Bunnings. And it could all go kablowy at any moment. Oh, my God, the sequences where they were making the explosives, I had my hands over my face. But balancing that with what you also need in an Ocean's 11 type movie, which is to be surprised by the extent of the plan and the twists in it, and who's going to get caught and who's got more layers to their plan than somebody else. So as movie, I think I loved it.
I enjoyed this far more than I thought I would. And the reason I think predominantly for me was the little backstories of each of the characters that they go into. So this rainbow coalition of, people that are involved in the caper represent very varied types of people, their backgrounds, their life experience, motivations. I think at least half of these people, and it's a decent sized group, we're talking about at least 10 people, right?
I think it's 8 in the core group, and then there's the wife of the lock the gate type,
yes,
and Dwayne.
Yeah, so but there are people that I think would not describe themselves as activists in this group at all. And perhaps, I think you've mentioned Dwayne. I think the two that I would put a mention in for as maybe the most interesting characters to my mind were him. So Dwayne, he's a tobacco chewing Texan who lives not far from the pipeline. So he's the local with the on-the-ground knowledge of where the pipelines are and how they might be accessed. And Michael, who is a First Nations person who travels from further away to participate in this. Yeah, North Dakota. And he is also the one who seems to be bringing the bomb-making expertise to the table as well.
Having given up his side hustle on bomb talk.
That's right, making TikToks of how to build bombs.
That was a bit weird. I mean, that was a kind of a thing I was thinking throughout this movie is like, you guys are not going to a huge amount of trouble to hide what you're doing.
Yeah. They have the clever little security camera switcheroo thing at the start, but otherwise these people should have been popping up on watch lifts left, right and centre. Mostly left.
Well, there was a couple of times when some of them know to put your phone in the fridge before you have any sort of conversation on this sort of stuff.
Yes.
That's right. I just wanted to note the interaction between those two characters that I found very compelling in some ways.
Yep.
Like when they're all at the, the ramshackle house where all of the planning and the bomb building is happening, those two characters sleep outside together in the tray of Dwayne's ute. And to me, it highlighted that but both those two people's motivations are quite different, but also quite similar in some ways. Dwayne is upset about the fact that his land has been seized by government under their eminent domain provisions, where the government can compulsorily acquire land for the purpose of building infrastructure. And he has talked about, not wanting to have left his land that had been in his family for over 100 years, and talked about the impact of oil pipelines and refineries on the air and the environment. And Michael's perspective, to me at least, was a more, I think, profound connection to land along those lines, given that he's a First Nations person. And so the fact they sort of sleep outside together, I think, to me, demonstrated that I think they have this common connection on respect for the environment, even though they're coming at it from quite different perspectives in some ways. And one exchange where they're all discussing whether they would be labeled eco-terrorists or terrorists after the bomb goes off. And there's a lot of back and forth about whether they see themselves as terrorists and accept that labeling, and people saying it's not going to hurt anyone, and someone says yes, we should acknowledge that what we're going to do is going to hurt a lot of people because it'll spike prices, and the poorest and least well off are the ones that will impact more. But Michael says in that exchange, sort of acknowledging that perhaps those people are collateral damage, and someone talks about infrastructure being collateral damage and that it'll take a lifetime to rebuild. And he says, I'm not trying to rebuild anything. And actually that was a more profound line to me, I think, because if you look at it from his perspective, this is his people's land that was seized from them. All this stuff, has been built up in the hundreds of years that his country's been colonised and taken away. And I think to him this is seen as a chance to return some of the land. I think his perspective is very much about returning land to its conserved state.
So within the logic of the movie, I think those characters both play a really critical role of kind of lending sort of local bona fides to this coalition, because absent them, it would read as a bunch of hipster urban climate activists jumping in a SUV and heading into the desert and mucking around without really understanding the local context. But with them, there are those perspectives that are more grounded and lend a legitimacy to the enterprise that wouldn't otherwise be there. There's also the implication in that that sleeping in the back of the SUV scene, Frankie, that both of them think that the rest of them are kind of boneheads.
Oh, totally.
But see, I think to me, this is one of the things that was missing about the movie, was what we did not really get much side of was the clash of personalities and the clash of everyone's different reason for being here. And, typically when you get a heist movie, that's a really important part of the plot, is the coming together of the group and the logistics of getting to the point where you do the heist, because that is where you start to see everyone's character and everyone's motivations coming out, and that moves the plot forward. And we didn't see any of that. And I actually found from that perspective that a lot of the characters came across as quite shallow and one-dimensional, because you were not seeing – you got these very quick flashbacks about, Sochi's there because her mum's died, and that's made her realise that divestment is, maybe not the thing that she wants to get involved in. And Theo's there because she's got leukemia that's possibly traceable to the fact that she grew up around an oil refinery. But those things then don't clash with each with each other, and they don't inform how the heist gets done and what they end up doing. And to me, that was kind of missing maybe I wanted it to be either more a typical heist movie or more of a explore people's motivations movie. And it kind of landed somewhere in the middle, and that didn't quite work for me.
It definitely felt like a more transactional relationship between all of them. Like they'd each come there with their own quite specific reasons, and they weren't interested, like basically, in building any kind of long-standing rapport with each other. And like I think that plays into the dynamic that you're talking about.
I listened to an interview with the director, Daniel Goldhaber, and one of the stars, Ariella Bearer, who were two of the screenwriters as well. And they talked about how they had actually a lot of the dialogue scenes and kind of some of those backstories were actually much more extended in the script, and they actually made the decision to pare them back. And it's an interesting sort of artistic choice, right? Because I went into this movie expecting it to be very talky. Given its source material, I thought there'd be lots of characters spouting ideas and having debates, and it wasn't really like that at all, with a few notable exceptions. And I get the impression that they kind of saw it on the screen and realised that there's the danger of kind of taking I guess some of us who are very interested in the ideas around this along for the journey, but kind of losing a general audience if they went too far into that. And they tended to focus more on the TikTok of the actual, the quote unquote heist itself, the plot that was being executed and the minutiae of that, which is a choice. And I suspect it probably works for some people and really doesn't for others.
Yeah. So in literature, for some people at least, you can make a very ideas-rich or maybe info dump-rich version of a story work. Although, for everybody who enjoys, say, a Neil Stevenson book in which you will get copious info dumps, there are people who will find that kind of thing like Ayn Rand, where the author avatar is just giving 30-page expositions on political philosophy.
That's one of the shorter tracks.
But there's not. I mean, this movie isn't trying to be like the sort of American crime trilogy. Well, I guess it's more than a trilogy now of Martin Scorsese. Casino or Goodfellas or The Wolf of Wall Street, which are trying to sort of explain how a system of harm works.
I've thought of The Wolf of Wall Street, the way that it kind of sort of changed mode and went into little explainers along the way. Like, that is a way this movie could have gone.
Well, I think that's a choice you've got to make when you make a movie is, are you going to show or are you going to tell?
Yep.
And one of the things that's quite common in heisty type movies is you have one character who's the narrator, who's like telling you what happens in the story. And so when you first see one of the other characters, they will go, this is Tennant. Tennant's come from here. He's had this experience. And so you just get all the backstory in like 2 minutes of dialogue, rather than the choice that they made here was to do quite a bit of showing. But because I think it's interesting that you say that they decided to actually cut out a lot of that. But yeah, and so because they chose just to show, you're kind of left with a somewhat incomplete picture if you've cut it out.
Yes. The other thing that the incompleteness of the movie in some ways allows is room for interpretability.
Yeah.
If they showed us too much, they would not be able to maintain the position of not quite letting you know what they really think about everybody and what they're doing and what the impacts will be. And I think that ambiguity is good because I do not think, and I would be surprised if any of you think, that it is a good idea in real life to go out and blow up infrastructure. And I would be much less comfortable with this movie, although I would still appreciate its its technical skill and its excitement if it was out and out imploring its audience to go and do that, which I don't think it is doing in this cut, at least.
Well, it's interesting because it doesn't, I think, try to put forward a view about whether we should all become eco-terrorists or not. But that's certainly something that the author of the book that this film is based on is arguing for. So
absolutely,
so it's based on it's a non-fiction by a Swedish academic. His name's Andreas Malm, who is is sort of critiquing non-violent climate activism, and that's picked up in some dialogue exchanges that I think, Alison, you referenced early on, by Sochi, who I guess is the ringleader.
She's the mastermind.
The mastermind behind this, and she's
the George Clooney of this movie.
She is, such as it is, and she is driven to act because her mother's passed away, I think from cancer, and it was certainly tied to the fact that they lived right next to an oil refinery. So the implication was that she was sick because of that.
I thought they said something. Someone said there was an extreme heat wave at the same time.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yep. Okay. So compounding factors there. And and then she sort of goes back to university after, I think, having been home for the funeral and everything. She's at uni in Chicago, and she's attending a divestment kind of action group meeting.
In a university library.
There was some good mansplaining in that scene
really
too.
was.
Like, I wanted to slap that guy who wanted to explain to her how important divestment was for things.
Can we read it out? Because I feel like I watched it like a few times so I could transcribe it.
Extra credit.
A dramatic reading from Frankie Muscovich. Well, this truly is a Christmas treat.
Let's see how we go. I'll do my best mansplaining voice.
Do you want to send us the script and we can act out the parts, Frankie?
Do we have time for that? Do you want to be mansplainer, Luke? No.
Ooh, sick burn.
I don't want to pull you up on your mansplaining there, Frankie, but...
Okay, sorry. This is like well overblown now. It's but she's sitting there. The guy is like, "This is our shot to make real change at our institution," and he says, "No one is saying divestment will solve everything, but it is a big step in the right direction." And then Sochi, our George Clooney, comes in. Well, which would be great if we still had some time, but by the time any market solution does shit, billions of people will be dead from climate disasters. Mansplainer. We all want faster change, but these are huge systems that change incrementally. Right, so act outside the system. We need to start attacking the things that are killing us. We need to take more drastic action. And I think possibly in that moment, the idea of blowing up a pipeline was born.
And it's... I don't know if it's telling. It's interesting that the three options this movie's characters collectively see for taking action on climate change are campus divestment, radical filmmaking, or blowing up pipelines. And it's a real cutting self-own in the presentation of the radical filmmaker as this useless, passive documentarian who's just uncomfortable. He's constructing little artificial tableau that will seem more naturalistic and just a waste of space. That's a part of a long tradition of filmmakers commenting on filmmakers. But it never seems to occur to anybody except Alicia, who is the one who voices that, hey, this is going to hurt people perspective. She's the most sensible person in the movie to me. And she's there against her better judgment because her partner, Theo, who is dying of cancer, wants to go out in a blaze of glory, getting revenge against the man. But, you know, she is voicing you need to, build stuff up and help people directly. And
she had this great line of, do you want to help people or do you want to help people? It was just a very slight change of emphasis in it. But, you know, that was really quite telling at that point.
Yes.
And she was very much focused on, you know, she was working in a soup kitchen and she was thinking about how she could support people in her community and felt like this was largely a frolic.
There was this weird thing at the end too, where I think this was the conversation between Alicia and Sochi in one of the flashbacks, I think, where Sochi's whole plan seemed to be not just that you blow up this pipeline, but then that you get yourself taken to court and you establish a legal precedent that actually it's okay to blow things up, and that will mean that more people won't get into trouble for blowing things up and they'll be more likely to blow things up. And when, you know, and Alicia was kind of like, are you crazy? Is that going to work? And I mean, and I was actually thinking the same thing when she kind of revealed that thing of, I'm dude, I'm not sure your legal system is up to that.
There was certainly, I missed the legal precedent bit of it, but I caught the idea that this was, you know, there was an acceptance from the characters that this wasn't going to, in and of itself, you know, transform the global economic system.
These are large systems that change only incrementally, so you need to blow them up incrementally. Appears to be the approach.
Well, they were hoping to inspire, you know, any number of copycat activity from others in the climate movement by legitimising this as a course of action. I think one thing that's really important to call out about this is that it's very focused, as I understand Malm's book is, on property destruction. Very focused on not hurting anybody, at least physically, although there is some conversation about, well, we're going to send up oil prices and that's going to have flow-on effects for disadvantaged people. So, well, you know, they sort of wave that away and go, well, that's all, you know, part of the transaction costs of getting the system to shift. And, you know, the way that the film is executed and the plot is executed, there's a close shave. Where, you know, some hapless sort of maintenance technicians on the pipeline almost go near the bomb, but are then kind of lured away from that. But ultimately, nobody is hurt other than some of the plotters themselves. And so, you know, a model of a successfully executed blowing up a pipeline exercise is laid out on screen. And I think, you know, one of the things that reading around this film and Malm's work, which is not really grappled with, is how one would maintain, if one was to pursue this as a theory of change, how one would maintain and control, you know, once you've crossed that line of property destruction and the idea that some level of violence or proactive destruction is legitimate, how you keep everybody on board for the idea that we're not hurting anybody. That's not grappled with at all.
But I think that's the other idea that isn't particularly grappled with either is why would the system be more motivated to change if you destroy property rather than if people are being hurt? Because many of the characters are already being hurt by the existence of this. And it's kind of like, that's a kind of an unspoken thing, is that has not been enough. And so we need to proceed to destroy property. And to me, that's the wrong way around, right? And it felt like it also like...
You think they weren't radical enough, Alison?
No, I just felt like it was this very American idea that people get more upset about terrorism that destroys property. Yeah. It actually seemed to be like it's kind of like they're very trapped in this paradigm about property rights that they can't get out of.
I think I agree with you that I think that's a very American sensibility, but I don't think it's a wrong observation either. Like, I think you could, if all of us in our day jobs, are arguing for policy change, there are very compelling human stories at the heart of a lot of climate impacts here and now. And, it's hard. Like, we bang on about regulatory impact statements and figures and all that sort of stuff. And, like, very rarely is the thing that's decisive in making a decision to adopt a policy or not relate directly back to a human story.
Or the discount rate.
Yeah, exactly, or collective impacts on people. So, I think that's actually, Alison, a super interesting insight, and I think it very much, would lend itself to an American sensibility, but I'm not entirely sure that isn't that wouldn't resonate.
I'm not sure it would be that different here.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it was also one of the things I was sort of thinking about related to that as well was I was homesick a couple of months ago, and I was watching just the TV for something to do, and I was watching The Drum, and they were talking about those two activists who blocked the Sydney Harbour Bridge from Extinction Rebellion. And they'd been in court that day, and they ask all the guests about, what does this say about people's right to protest? And one of the guests, I think it was Kate Carnell, but I'm not sure, said, well, look, it's fine if people want to protest, but they need to do it so it doesn't disrupt things. And I was kind of like, you're missing the point. Like, the whole point about protest, whether it is blocking the Sydney Harbour Bridge or blowing up a pipeline or whatever, is that you do that when asking politely has not worked. And if you don't want people to blow up pipelines or block the Sydney Harbour Bridge, pay more attention when they're asking you politely to change. Like, that's how you avoid the disruption and the violent acts and so on, is actually to respond to people when they're coming to you and saying, could we please stop doing this thing?
And there is a discussion in the movie of the history of change makers and the argument that successful change makers are whitewashed subsequently to have been less radical or less disruptive than they really were. Or less violent, goes the argument from some of the characters, although I think they may be going a bit far in their characterisation of Martin Luther King in that respect. But this question of limited violence is both, like, it's a really interesting meld of problems in political thinking and problems in movie making, because, like, non-violent violence, consequence-free violence is a thing that is in many people's minds, and it's in a lot of movies and TV shows, whether it is like the A-Team for very old people now, firing thousands of rounds of ammunition and having no casualties, whether it is Marvel movies where an infinity of robots or faceless goons get knocked down, or it's in a movie like this where an intricate plan in which lots of things can go wrong somehow results in no civilian casualties at all. It's a really seductive idea that you can just do what's needed, and if you're careful about it, you won't hurt anybody who shouldn't be hurt. But in real life, it does not work that way at all.
So it is deliberately so. So going back to this interview I listened to with Goldhaber and Bearer, which we'll link in the show notes, they are explicitly aiming to create a sort of a leftist fairy tale for how one could execute this sort of plot. I came away from the movie like you tend to going, well, you know, there's ideas in there, but it's playing a fairly straight bat. But if one gets extra textual and goes and listens to the creators and screenwriters of the movie, they see this as an advertisement for Mum's book. Yeah. And they see this as a way of, getting a general audience excited about these ideas. Now, in this interview, the interviewer doesn't actually explicitly ask either of them, so do you think people should go start blowing up pipelines? But everything that they say around that suggests that that is indeed their view and that this is their contribution to encouraging the left to become more radical. It sounds like the reason they adapted the book is because they agree with it, that climate activists need to, gird their loins and, put aside this ineffective pacifism and start breaking stuff to make their point. And they explicitly made this a successful attempt, and they say this in the interview, because they said, well, these are tough ideas, and traditionally there would be some kind of comeuppance for the characters sort of flying too close to the sun, but they wanted it to be a successful plot to inspire people to think about how they could engage in these sorts of activities, which made me, having listened to them talk about what the intention of the film was, much less comfortable with the film.
Yeah. Death of the author is a critical concept that can be harder to apply once you've listened to the author.
Yeah. So, to that end, what the movie does not really include at all is what happens to everyone after the pipeline blows up.
Yeah. You get highly interpretable little vignettes.
Yeah, that's right. You sort of see, each of the characters kind of, they all disperse, and you sort of, at least I was left thinking, some of these people might get away with not being discovered, or their involvement not being discovered. But then very, intentionally, and maybe this the surprising, the twist, if you could call it that, in this, is that it's Sochi and Theo, spoiler, are very much going to be caught after having set fire to the house where all the bomb making was happening. They were waiting for the cops. And as we said before, the intention was basically to martyr themselves and try and create a precedent that would encourage more people to do this.
See, I thought with that ending, they could have left it ambiguous as to whether Theo and Sochi got caught or not. They could have stopped at that point where that they've put... So sorry, massive spoilers here, everybody.
I gave a spoiler alert at the start of this podcast. Yeah. This is Spoiler City.
This is Spoiler City. They could have left it at the point where they've set fire to the house. That there's a small bomb in it. You can hear the sirens coming, and they're standing there in the dirt. And I think Theo turns to Sochi and says, "It's been nice knowing you, dude." And I think you could have cut it there. Yeah. And you could have left this fantastic ambiguity as to whether did they blow up the cops, did they blow up themselves, did they end up getting caught and end up in jail? And I think that would have been a better ending for those two characters, because then it would have been, I think, largely ambiguous for all of the characters as to what happened to them, and what came afterwards. Did they get away with it or not?
Well, the one thing that we do know at the end of this movie is that at least some additional people have been inspired by the end of it to take a similar property damage course, and they're blowing up
like a yacht.
Rich people's yachts.
Yeah. And they're leaving flyers at the scene of the crime, and there's one line on them that jumps out. It says, "If the law will not punish you, then we will." That seems to be the tagline for the movement.
By blowing up your yacht.
Yep.
Mm-hmm. Sochi's in prison, and I think my partner thought she looked like she was having a bad time. To me, she looked serenely convinced of her own rightness, and was having a terrific time as a political prisoner.
I think I'm more with your partner, and there was this nice line that Alicia had, I think, which was sort of saying, "Oh, why is everyone assuming that people have nothing to lose? Everyone," and she was sort of implying everyone's got something to lose. There is no such thing as someone who's got nothing to lose. And to me, when there was that scene with Sochi at the end where she's in the cell and she's just kind of staring into space, to me, that was what was going around in her head, was really, did I have nothing to lose, or have I lost something here?
So what do we think actually happened after this movie? Because that's where your ambiguity has to drop away, and you've got to say, does this kind of thing work? Or
in the logic of this movie, they all get away except the ones that wanted to be caught.
Yes.
In reality, they all get caught because they're all bloody hopeless.
Sure.
yes,
Except maybe Dwayne. I actually reckon Dwayne probably takes this whole secret to the grave and is otherwise an upstanding citizen. And then his children find some piece of evidence when they're cleaning out the house after he's died and gone, Grandpa did what?
Yeah, that's fair. Maybe he was slightly more competent in the whole covering his tracks enterprise.
He was kind of the adult in the room a lot of the time.
yeah.
He was. In terms of systemic change, Tennant, not a lot.
Yeah, well, I think oil prices spiked for a period, and then there was more oil imported to the United States from authoritarian countries that don't provide a lot of space for people to run around and blow things up. And there may well have been some anti-renewables, anti-transmission activists inspired to blow up other infrastructure. For all I know.
Hey, I think the Texas legislature would have rushed through some laws to make it some kind of like life in prison, if not capital punishment kind of law if you blow up oil infrastructure for national security reasons. And I think a Republican-dominated Congress would have probably done the same thing.
And mealy-mouthed, meliorist liberals in the United States would have run for cover from any association with this kind of action whatsoever. And so would I, because my God.
Indeed. This podcast has now successfully mansplained to the characters in this movie why their efforts are futile. As is the holiday tradition, we close out these specials with one more thing in which we all share something worthy of captivating your attention this holiday season. Frankie, what have you got?
I reiterate, Frankie, I will go trashy if you go trashy.
Oh, okay.
Okay. We've got a trash off.
Well, I've been in a slightly different situation these past months where I've had, in some respects, all the time in the world to consume,
but in
pop
other
culture.
important respects.
But in other important aspects, the brain power that can be lent to said endeavours is very limited. So at the reputable end of the spectrum, I've been making my way through Alan Kohler's quarterly essay called "The Great Divide." So it's about Australia's housing crisis and how we might fix it. Alan Kohler, you will have seen him on ABC, on TV. He talks finance there. I think he just has a very crisp way of presenting the issues, and I really appreciated that in the quarterly essay. So, look, I would thoroughly recommend it. In terms of understanding, the evolution of this crisis and where we might go to from here. And he's just got a really clear, no BS kind of way of talking about it, which I appreciate and is generally rare when talking about these kinds of gnarly policy challenges. So that's at my reputable end of the spectrum.
Now tell us what you really been watching.
Okay, you've covered yourself.
Yes, I have. So listeners, summer
For your actual recommendation.
Remember that I have been consuming all manner of trash TV in the wee hours of the morning whilst I was up breastfeeding LBM. So I, don't mind admitting that I've had a long, obsession with Kevin Costner, having loved Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves when I was a kid. He might have been my first celebrity crush, I reckon. I make no apologies for this. And so I watched every season of Yellowstone, his little kind of Western frolic set in Montana. in the US. And actually, you could see he's sort of a much more well-resourced and land-endowed version of our Dwayne from How to Blow Up a Pipeline. Anyway, so I've loved that.
Is that trash? Does Yellowstone qualify as trash? This trashy TV show, The Sopranos.
I thought you were going to say the Kardashians or something.
Yeah. I was here for reality TV.
I'm leaving some depths to plumb yet. So, I'm sure I'll get there.
Frankie, I said I would provide you with cover. You're going to make me look bad now.
You've been lured into the trap, Reed.
Yep.
Okay, no. Okay, the true trash amongst the detritus of my watching history in the last few months was that LBM was born around the time the block was starting this year.
That's proper trash. Well done.
Okay.
That's trash. And because there was an episode, I didn't realize there's so much TV to consume of this show. There was an episode every day. So I ended up watching it about 3 a.m. in the morning whilst I was breastfeeding. Don't remember anything that happened, but I spent far too much time watching bitchy chats about renovation. There you go.
Were you waving your fist at the screen because of their lack of focus on sustainability issues?
Yes, it was infuriating. And one of them marketed one of their houses was marketed as sustainable. I'm like, how do you figure that, love?
There should be a goggle box of Frankie watching The Block.
Oh, don't make me go there. I would so do that. Who's going to do it with me? Come on. Oh, this is where
I approve.
It doesn't
I'll be there.
get up. Yeah.
That can be one for our future Patreon subscribers.
Platinum tier.
Okay. Well, I've done it. I have no clothes. Right. You go in.
Legitimate trash.
You go, tenant.
All right, I will start with trash and end with treasure. The trash is a Netflix car upgrade show called Car Masters Rust to Riches, where over several seasons we've followed the travails of scrappy artistic car upgrade joint Gotham garage as they work their way up from cheap and nasty vehicles, trading and always climbing the ladder. I have been watching their newest season, which just dropped. I've been wondering for nearly a year what happened with their new partnership with hoity-toity British accented car dealer guy. And I have been horrified in a manner very familiar to you, Frankie, with the latest plotline in this reality/fantasy show, where they've taken a commission to convert a Tesla into a petrol car.
Oh, what?
Yes. And I have been watching this with my hands balled into fists, going, this is wrong on every level. I feel like some kind of extreme social conservative watching RuPaul's Drag Race or something. There's rules being violated right in front of me. And it's just a bad idea. It's worse than a crime. It's
going to be a shit car. The
That's
only
right.
reason you would do this is if Teslas were the most elegant and best looking car on the market, which they are not.
Yes, well, there's also that. So anyway, the show is very entertaining for trash and is much better than some of the other car upgrade shows. I don't know why it is that I'm watching car upgrade shows. I don't actually care about cars, but this trash is compelling trash. The quality thing that I will leave on is a book, a popular science book called A City on Mars by Kelly and Zach Weinersmith. And this is a pretty deep, very thoroughly researched look at the idea of space settlement and what would be involved in it across more dimensions than most people would have considered. not just things like how do you get up there, or how do you stop from starving to death in space, but what's the legal situation? What's the ethical situation around trying to have a family in an environment where actually we don't know what the developmental impacts of microgravity or low gravity or higher radiation exposure might be on children. And these are ideas that are worth examining because a couple of the richest men in the world are trying to make different versions of space settlement happen. To go off this book, there's an awful lot of groundwork left to be done, maybe a couple of centuries worth of groundwork before anything even vaguely sensible could happen in the realm of settlement, going beyond a sort of McMurdo Station type science outposts to something where people are meant to live.
So would you say some of those like ethical and governance issues are equally applicable to a planet whose climate is changing very quickly?
Absolutely. But I would say on that front, a point that the book makes very, very well, for anybody who thinks either in a positive or a negative sense that like travel to Mars is like an escape hatch from a troubled Earth, we would have to screw up Earth vastly more than climate change. As terrible as climate change is, we would have to screw it up so much more badly than Earth before Mars would look better. Like no breathable atmosphere, high radiation exposure, poison soil, low gravity that you can't predict how children will develop in, a need to live underground forever.
With Zuckerberg wants to do, right? Hasn't he built himself some sort of underground bunker?
Zuckerberg may have a bunker. Musk obviously wants to move to Mars, and Jeff Bezos wants to move. He's got a different flavour of things. It's the giant orbiting space habitat flavour of things. Move all the industry up there somehow. That doesn't work.
It's long been my view that, an extensive program of taxpayer spending on sending all of these multi-billionaires to Mars would be
one-way
money
tickets.
well spent.
One-way tickets we need to emphasise.
Also part of the plot of the latest season of For All Mankind. All right, that's too many things.
We could do Alone, the Mars version.
All right, Alison, what have you got?
Do I need to do something trashy, or can
No,
I?
you do whatever you want.
Be disciplined. Draw a contrast with the rest of us.
I was trying to make up my mind between two good options, so I might just give you the two good options, seeing as we all seem to get two. So the first one is, if you want to see a heist movie that is a straightforward heist movie, then the 1986 quirky Aussie classic Malcolm is streaming on SBS at the moment. It is funny. It has really excellent special effects, which are even more excellent when you remember there was no CGI at that stage, and so everything had to be built in person. And it's a classic worth seeing, so that's my number one.
Might be the only movie in which somebody makes a getaway on a tram.
Indeed, it is the only movie I remember where someone makes a getaway on a tram, and there is no ambiguity at the end as to what happens to the characters either.
Hooray!
And my second one is also a movie. It's a documentary. It's called Long Live Chainsaw, and it is about the very short life and career of a guy called Stevie Smith, who was the world champion at downhill mountain bike racing in 2016 and then died very tragically. It is a rags to riches story. It is a story about the world of elite mountain bike racing, which is like completely closed to everybody else. It is a world like you've never seen before. And it's also a story about someone who was a really good human being who just touched the lives of seems like everyone that he met. I got onto it because he was a very good friend of my brother's, but even if you are not into mountain biking, not into extreme sports at all, I still think it's worth a watch.
Fantastic.
Going on the list immediately.
Sounds excellent. I'm making a brave choice, endorsing The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings. Scrappy up, Steve.
I'm sorry, what are they?
I've never
J.R.R.
heard of
Tolkien.
Never heard of those.
But in all seriousness, I've just finished listening to the relatively new unabridged recordings of The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings that are narrated by Andy Serkis, the actor who played Gollum in the Peter Jackson films. And they're just great. He is a wonderful voice actor, and he hews closely to the accent choices made in those films. So if you like your dwarves with Scottish accents, you're in luck. And of course, you get Serkis's now iconic Gollum voice performance delivering Tolkien's original dialogue, which is, I reckon, worth the price of admission by itself. So I'm happy to report that I, over the last month, have now spent, I want to say, like 70-odd hours listening to these audiobooks and letting them wash over me, having read them once or twice in the past. And I would be feeling a bit bereft at this point, except Serkis has also recorded The Silmarillion. So I have another 20 hours to look forward to. A balm for my soul. I recommend you, if you have even a passing interest in Tolkien and are inclined to revisit those classics, it's a good way of doing it.
I'm kind of tempted, and I'm also kind of a little bit cautious because my father read The Lord of the Rings to me when I was a kid, like about 5, and I remember there were scenes in it where I was absolutely terrified. And I'm kind of okay with like reading words on a page of it as an adult, but I'm not sure I could handle someone saying it out loud.
I did not have that issue, but your mileage may vary.
Oh, for me, it was a bit with the spiders. Sorry, spoiler alert.
Shelob is pretty scary. I reckon that is definitely the scariest part of the book. So, but if you're going to do it, take that journey down those dark passageways with anyone, I recommend Serkis. And for those of you thinking, Luke, seriously, you're endorsing Lord of the Rings, tell me something I don't know. In the spirit of our double recommendations, I suggest you check out The Murderbot Diaries, which is a series of action-adventure books about a soap opera-obsessed cyborg security unit. I won't say any more about it other than that there's like just dropped with the 6th or 7th book in that series. They're very, very good, but the whole series is well worth checking out. So,
I endorse them as a delight.
Oh, you've read them?
I've read one.
Oh, there you go. They're very good.
And I was delighted.
Yeah, very, very good. And they get better as they go along. All right. That'll see all of our summer uppers through the next month, I reckon, getting through all that content.
Having a very coherent, high fantasy, car upgrading, housing crisis addressing, mountain biking holiday of their dreams.
Something for everybody.
Yes.
You need an exit strategy from that audio book rabbit hole you've gone down, like after Silmarillion, because it's so depressing when you finish something that's so brilliant and fantastic. You need to start looking for your next audiobook obsession now.
Is there a audiobook version of The Block that I could get onto?
Basically just people screaming at each other.
I think so. Although, oh no, I'm not advertising the Block podcast on this show, except the fact that I've just told you that there is a podcast.
We can report the Block podcast will not be in the show notes. It has been an absolute pleasure summing things up for you all this year. We're going to take a break over January, but rest assured we'll be back summing things up for you in February. If you wanted to lob a report our way for our consideration, Alison, you've had a little bit of a break. I hesitate to ask, but do you remember our email address?
It's mailbag@letmesumup.net.
Yes, it absolutely is.
And you should send us an email, particularly if you sample any of our recommendations. Be interesting to hear what people think of them.
That would be great.
Or if you have some audiobook recommendations for Luke.
Yeah, I'm always here for audiobooks. If you are at a loose end over the next month, there are now over 40 episodes in the back catalogue. And Tenant, where would one find said episodes?
At www.letmesumup.net. All of those episodes and all the well-advised sequels that are yet to be produced, unlike sequels to the Lord of the Rings films or the Star Wars trilogy, you can find all of the excellent content at letmesumup.net right now.
All right, well, for Frankie Muscovich, Alison Reeve, and Tina Reid, I'm Luke Menzel. Thanks for listening, and we'll talk to you again in 2024. There's only one final burning question left to us in 2023. When can we expect those T-shirts?
I'm picking up my T-shirt procurement duty with gusto in the new year. But, and you should know better than anyone else, we do have some exciting propositions for you all, summer uppers, in the new year, of which we will not speak more now, but we'll leave you on that tantalising note.
A cliffhanger. I love it.